My guest today is Maggie Feldman-Piltch. She is the founder and CEO of Unicorn Strategies, an innovative human capital management widely known for its project, NatSec Girl Squad. NatSec Girl Squad is an intentional community and ecosystem focused on building competent diversity in national security and defense. Maggie is also a co-chair of the initiative committee at LCWINS. Maggie is an exceptionally proud graduate of Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and she earned her master's degree from Georgetown's SFS Security Studies program. Today, she'll discuss with us her innovative work with NatSec Girl Squad. She understands that national security comes in all different shapes and sizes, and we'll talk today about active participation. Thanks for joining Candid Leadership today and listening to this important conversation. All right, Maggie, it's great to have you here today.
I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this podcast for 2 years.
Well, it's, you are my conclusion to season 2. So it's a pretty,
no pressure.
Pretty awesome. Yeah, pretty awesome spot to be in. And especially it's so awesome because so much of what your organization has done actually influenced kicking this thing off.
Aww. I mean, that makes me very happy to hear because obviously I listen to the podcast. And it's always rewarding to me to hear like when you interview other NatSec Girl Squad people, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I know them.
There you go. And the fact that I think just being in the community itself and the national security community and being able to kind of influence other people has been pretty awesome. So I'm going to kick it off. What got you interested in national security?
That is a really good question. And I ask myself that with more frequency than I'd like to admit, right? Like, I think particularly during the pandemic, some of us are like, how did I get here? And there's certainly a part of it that came from binge watching The West Wing my senior year of college, which is, probably the most boring answer. But I think also there was a part of me that always knew I wanted to be in public service. And at the same time, I really had planned to work in corporate social responsibility, which is clearly not what I'm doing, but specifically in the fashion industry. And I did try that and realized I did not like it. And I came to DC sort of on a whim, mostly fueled by The West Wing and a few other things, and was like, oh, I really like this. And I seem to be some variation of not terrible at it. And it just went from there.
Yeah, I like the fact that you really did start so many of those threads. And I think many of us get into national security because we have that impetus and desire and drive to make change, but also do what's right, do what we think is right for the country. And so with your kind of corporate social responsibility attitude that you had already invested in yourself, you were able to apply those skills into national security in the business that you run right now. There is a direct correlation to that. I've heard you speak on multiple times, and the work that you do for responsibility and totality of national security and bringing to light areas that could use a little more cleansing daylight, you then expose in a way that invites others to join you, making it more inviting, more enticing, and just better as a whole. Nice. I think it's pretty awesome.
What a great way to start my day, right? Like all the nice things. See it that way, because I see it that way too. But, it's always important that to a certain extent, someone out there in the universe gets what you're trying to do, what you're aiming for, right? And I really do try to hang on to this idea that all of us got into this work for the right reasons, right? To make the world a better place, to do the right thing for our country or what we think is the right thing. And it's about figuring out what to do with what skills that you have, right? Like of your skills, what can you do to contribute? And I know that by nature, like I'm a doer for sure. I'm not an academic. And that is not a shot at academics. I truly look at, PhD candidates and professors alike. And I'm like, wow, you have a level of just sheer focus, like hyper focus that I do not have. And there have been times where I've thought really long and hard, like, should I get a PhD? And fortunately, somebody somewhere, sticks their head out and is like, please don't do that. But so knowing that that's not me, right, that I'm more of a doer, I care a little bit less about whose good idea it is and more that we implement it. And that I'm definitely a communicator by nature and always been that way. And am pretty idealistic for sure. I think the joke, when NatSec Girl Squad first started, and it's a pretty accurate representation probably of my personality, is that it's part unicorn, part pit bull, right? And I sort of cringe at that dichotomy because as a very proud pit bull mom, I refuse to believe that those two things are opposites because they are the sweetest dogs. But having never met a true unicorn, in real life, I can't speak to their temperament. So I will leave it up to our listeners to decide which of those two creatures is the more gruff of the two.
I think that, speaking to that kind of grittiness in what you've done, there are so many of us in national security that see the world in that manner. And the fact that your grittiness, I'm going to kind of quote Colin Powell, and I'm not sure if he's the first one to have said it, but I know I've heard him state this, in the fact that it's amazing what you can get done in the world without taking credit for it. Like you can get so much more done if you just don't care who the credit goes to. Right. And that's what I really think that the idea, the temperament, what goes on in the NatSec Girl Squad community. Can you tell me a little bit about that community? How do people get involved and about membership?
Yeah. So to get involved in NatSec Girl Squad, there's really two ways to do it. The first is kind of the informal way, which is to say like, oh, I'm in NatSec Girl Squad now. And there are certainly people that do that and like, welcome. The quote, real way to get involved is to go to the website, natsecgirlsquad.com, and you will see there's a little button there that says membership. And you can join as a member, right? And dues start at $20 a year. So we really tried to not make it cost prohibitive for anyone. And if that is something that you're not able to, dedicate to the organization, but you really want to participate, you can always reach out to us. And we do our best to make it work. And really what it means to be a part of NatSec Girl Squad is this idea of a professional development community, right? So it's being committed not just to your own professional and personal goals, but kind of this idea of building as we climb, right? That if you're the first, you should not be the last. And to build an infrastructure, not just behind you, but with you as you go, to make it easier for yourself and for other people. I think the way that we talk about the mission is really that it's about helping members of the community define success for themselves, reach that definition of success, and help, build the tools that each of us need to reach that definition of success, and then not be afraid to recalibrate, right? Like in a very Clausewitzian way of when you get new information, recalibrate, right? So that's really broadly, I guess, what I would say NatSec Girl Squad is. And I would also maybe add the detail that, we have a fairly strict code of conduct that is really centered on this idea of intentional kindness or no sharp elbows, mostly because I don't have the stomach for it, right? There are so many other terrible things in the world. Like I'm not going to waste some of my bandwidth and my ability to deal with those things when it's not necessary. And really the quotation you mentioned, right? It's like, it's amazing what you can get done when you're not worried about taking credit for it. Just get it done. Like, take credit and receive credit where it's appropriate and necessary. But if that is your primary motivator, please go into another line of work.
Right. And I love the fact, like, if you can be anything, just be kind. And especially in national security, as we're trying to bring this kind of next generation into this community, it really is important to take that step. If you've already cleared a path, make sure you're turning backwards and lending a hand out to someone else. And that really brings me to my next point in the discussion you mentioned on mentoring, and a huge mentorship proponent here. But I think mentoring is really critical both up and down. And that harkens to, we've talked in the past, and I know many listeners know Dr. Adam Grant. His seminal book, I love the book, Give and Take. It's really important for those people that we mentor in our life. And I know I've seen you do it in so many different ways. But it's important that mentees not just sit as inactive participants. I think like constantly being on receive mode, it's simply like watching the TV and eating popcorn. Instead, individuals really that contribute to national security have to both actively participate in what they do and also mentor up. And how have you seen that done?
Yeah, I think this is a really good point. And for sure, it's something you and I have talked about quite a bit, that I don't even, for me, it's not just like something you should do, it's something you have to do to get where you're trying to go, right? I totally agree. I've seen a lot of like 100% receive mode, and I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's useful. It is one of those things for me that's like nails on a chalkboard almost, because I think on the one hand, it sets up this situation where there's all this pressure on one person in what is at the very least a bilateral relationship, right? And we know that when partners are working together, if there is not an equitable division, right, not equal, but equitable, so taking into consideration, each other's resources and skills and bandwidth, but if there is not an equitable division of responsibilities and of engagement, the partnership is doomed for failure, right?
Right.
And I also think it sets up, or it, the very least, endorses and encourages this idea that you have to wait for somebody somewhere to tell you you are good enough to participate. And that's different to me from recognizing the value of expertise. That is certainly, expertise is something that we absolutely need in national security, particularly on the practitioner side. But the idea that until you reach a certain point, you have nothing to give, right? And it really endorses this passive existence, like you talked about, sitting in front of the TV and eating popcorn. I'm trying to come up with like the most polite way to say this. It just makes me totally wild because, first of all, it can be exhausting for the person that is in, quote, give mode, right? At the same time, it really puts the supposed receiver, and it takes them out of the driver's seat of their own life, right? It just puts another step between ourselves and personal responsibility. And I'm a huge fan of personal responsibility, particularly because we are each different people, and what works for one person may not work for the next person, and what one person wants is very likely not what the next person wants, right? And so The only way to get what you are aiming for is to not only have a clear definition of what that idea of success is, but to be actively engaged in the journey. And no one will do for you, right? And then I think the last piece that really comes to, Adam Grant's book and what you were hinting at is that this is a community, right? We have a responsibility and an opportunity to take care of one another. If you have the motivation to do that altruistically, great. That's certainly a big part of it for me. I think there's also a piece where we have to remember that national security is a team sport, right? So if we're not taking care of each other, we're not taking care of the team, and we're not going to get done what we need to get done. So the idea that other people should mentor you and you have nothing to give or offer in support of them is just a breeding ground for toxic leadership, I think.
And the fact that, when you roll your sleeves up, you're becoming a part of the solution. Like you are actively participating in your own success, your own life. But also, a lot of the people I mentor, and I'm very fortunate to have just such a great growing, ecosystem that's taught me so much. But I will provide you the blueprint. You've got to build your own bridge. And I'll be honest, I don't have the map of your life, but I have a
Right.
map of my life, and I can show you, hey, here's the map. Here are places I have wildly been successful, but guess what? Those places don't exist anymore. And that
Right.
even yesterday, I was talking to someone, you could not follow my career path because most of those units don't exist anymore. Those opportunities aren't even there. And that's okay. You've just got to look forward in your life. Where are those areas in a similar vein that you could follow and kind of shape your own destiny and start to create the environment? I think people underestimate the networking side of it. And networking is not a bad word to say. And I think we have talked in the past, not only networking is not a bad word to use, another one is ambition, right? And
Yes.
we have talked at length about Reese Witherspoon. She gave a
Yes.
great speech when she received an award from Glamour. It was a Woman of the Year speech. She riffed on why ambition is not a dirty word, and especially for women, it's absolutely not. I know we've talked about that. And how do you take that?
You're 100% right. I mean, I love Reese Witherspoon. I've always loved Reese Witherspoon. I mean, as I mentioned, The West Wing, kind of the other side of that story is that for those that have not seen Legally Blonde 2, particularly if you consider yourself a connoisseur of important American works, for example, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you've really got to see Legally Blonde 2. First of all, shot for shot, same movie, except better. I just have so much respect for how she carries herself and communicates with the outside world. I think she's wonderful. Ambition is not a dirty word. There is nothing wrong with being ambitious. There are a lot of things right with being ambitious. Sometimes I think we hear about, it's important to have ambition tempered by X. And I say no to that because there is nothing inherently wrong with ambition, just like there's nothing inherently wrong with commitment to hard work, right? Nobody says you need to be committed to the job, but temper it with insert, whatever else, even though we acknowledge how crucial balance is, right? So I think it's the same idea, and we shouldn't treat ambition as anything different. I think it's also important to acknowledge ambition means or manifests itself in different ways for different people. And that's great, right? My ambitions, what I am ambitious for or towards, or how it shows in the world, can and should be different from yours. There is nothing about ambition that bleeds into sharp elbows to me, right? Like those are unrelated items. And the sooner and faster and more consistently we can untangle the two, particularly when it comes to women and anybody that's outside of, this default in the national security space of straight white men with military experience, the better we're going to be. And by better, I mean, honestly, like safer, more secure, more lethal, more ready, like more agile, all those things we want as a country. The faster we're going to get there if we stop acting like being ambitious is the equivalent of showing up to work naked.
That's true. I've never done that. In my mind's eye, I'm going to make sure,
right.
I will use ambition in a way that I will embrace the fact I do wear a uniform to work every day. It's pretty awesome. It is an amazing job. And I work with amazing men and women that wear clothes every day. And they're, those that roll their sleeves up and get down to work. They're the ones that I am most excited to, now I do elbow high fives or fist bumps, but it is pretty exciting. And I look around, when I look around at the people, and I know you do in where you're at in the world, you see people in your space and you just can feel the fact those who are committed and those who are adding to the world. And it's important because some of those, not all, but some of those really understand their value. And I know we've talked about knowing your own value in the importance of that. But you've got to build up skills to get to that value level. And how do you see those who are committed in this world of national security building those skills? And, skills are different in whatever domain you're in. How do you see the commitment to that?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I see it and see it early is when, in like in the context of mentorship being a place that you have the opportunity to see this in people, is when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about X. I've already done Y and Z. What else do you think I'm missing? Right. And the reason I cite that as an example of someone who's committed and not necessarily as somebody who's like highly educated and connected, right? Because it's really important to acknowledge that we're all starting from a different place and we don't all have not just the same networks, but familiarity with how to engage professionally and personally and the same kind of clarity on what we want to do in our lives and all those things, right? But anybody can come to a conversation and say, like, I'm thinking about X and I've already done Y and Z. And what those Y and Z are may be different. So for some people, they have, started reaching out to people. For some people, they don't know anybody to reach out to. So they started Googling, right? Or they're reading and like something it's almost hard to totally articulate, but you certainly know it when you see it. This idea of, are you the Zamboni, right? Somebody who will go out on the ice and ahead of me, smooth everything out, make it pretty for me. So all I have to do is show up and skate. Or is this person someone who goes out onto the ice ahead of time for themselves with a cup of water and fills in the holes and lets them set and freeze and then does it for somebody else too, right? Are they looking for a Zamboni, or are they looking to, for suggestions on what kind of cup to use or where to get water from? That's the way I think about it, because that's the way my brain works. I need, the imagery. And it's, are you expecting me to hand over the blueprint of my life and also every piece of infrastructure I've built for myself, step off of it and allow you to take over? Or are you saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking about for my blueprint. Does this look structurally sound? When you realize that those are two different categories or camps of people, when you know to look for kind of that vibe, one or the other, you'll find it pretty fast, right? It'll stick out to you. And I think you'll also be able to recognize people that are great at making it look like they are asking for your input on their blueprint or directions to a hardware store, but are in fact looking to just walk all over your infrastructure. And there's certainly a fine line between lending progress you've made, right? We talked about this idea of building as you climb, because you do want it to be easier. And maybe that's the wrong way to describe it. It's not about making it easier for the people who are coming along with you or behind you. It's about making sure everybody has their own chaos, right? That we're not all suffering from the same things that were fixable, right? Structural problems. And that when we each come to our own various crossroads and whatever else, like we have the tools and access to tools to know how to deal with them.
Phenomenal. Wow, that visual is so spot on in so many different ways.
Right.
To someone who appreciates a good analogy of frozen ice,
Right.
with my last name, I've heard many riffs on frost.
I can imagine.
Yes. My latest one was I showed up to a new organization and someone said, winter is coming. And I was like,
dun, dun, dun.
I know, right? That is good.
Yeah, you should get that on a jacket.
I do. I think it should be a part of the business card. Winter.
Yeah, could you put it on a challenge coin? Like, even though my feelings on challenge coins are complex, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I probably could. I haven't done that yet, but there you go. Ideas.
Oh my God, put it on a coin.
Yeah. I think, speaking of challenging things, running a small business, and that is what you have done, and the grittiness of the hustle. Holy smokes. This is something for those of us in the federal government. I was speaking of, where we get our greatness from other women who have made it happen.
Yeah.
This idea came into my head, and I listened to Love Rutledge and her podcast
Mm.
about federal employees. And I was like, that is so phenomenal. And so I was like, hey, I want to talk about leadership. And so I
Yeah.
started this because there just weren't a lot of podcasts out there that had really women in national security. And it's not just for women, it's just leadership in general.
Right.
In the national security space that weren't focused on academic pursuits or focused on
Right.
hardcore military. There is a space in there. And so I
Right.
said, okay, I'm going to start a business. And the grittiness of the hustle is real. Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to sell you something.
Yes.
And it's incredibly long hours, little pay.
Yes.
And in this space, everybody wants you to do it for free.
All the
And
time.
I know you've experienced that.
Yes. And my favorite part about the doing it for free is that if you don't do it for free, you're not patriotic, right? And the idea of doing something and needing to be paid for it is dirty in some people's minds. Or they act like it is. And something that I personally run into quite a bit is people who believe that NatSec Girl Squad must be a nonprofit organization, and that the fact that it is a for-profit entity makes it disingenuous. And the number of reasons that makes me want to jump off of a high building, I won't, is not small, right? And whenever somebody says that to me, and I would say that it happens at least a dozen times a week, no joke, right? It says to me that they have no idea what they're talking about. And I say that because, yes, I acknowledge that there are a number of fabulous nonprofit organizations focused on women in foreign policy, women in national security, women in defense. I am a member of a number of them, like LCWINS, like Women in Defense, like Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy. Like, yes, agreed. But one, we are not them. Two, if I were let's say a bad actor and I wanted a really strong resource to better understand the networks and personal relationships of the national security apparatus, the first place I would look would be the disclosure documents, right, of these organizations. I would look at their membership rolls, because if you are a nonprofit entity, you have to share where your money comes from, which you should. That's the law in this country, and it's a good one. And I did not want and do not want to put our members individually and a sum of our parts, right, in a situation where that information and their personal information was accessible to anybody, right? So that was from a very basic, like, kind of organizational hygiene perspective.
Right.
And then there's this other piece of, when we look at just the numbers broadly, women who run organizations, statistically speaking, are more likely to run nonprofit organizations. And that helps perpetuate not just the wage gap, but the wealth gap. And that we have a lot of above the surface and below the surface challenges when it comes to talking about women, let alone ambitious women, and money. And as you know, one of NatSec Girl Squad's partners is LVEST. And Sally, their founder, spoke at our annual conference and said something she has said a million times, but she said it to me, right? And in our conversation, and it has stuck with me. Nothing bad happens when women have more money, right? There is nothing inherently dirty about women having more money, especially when you live in a capitalist society, and especially when you look around and you see that, not just, you know, in the broad sense, but particularly in the national security space, how dominated by men the for-profit side is, and nobody accuses them of being less of a patriot, right? Nobody would dare. So why do we think it's okay? And there are a few pockets of the national security apparatus where I see this more plainly than the, quote, innovation space, right? Where we have entire government departments that have more men named Matt that work in them than women or people of color. And I'm like, how is this? How you are supposed to be the most innovative? What is this?
And I think there are sectors I have seen in 2 decades, phenomenal growth and change. I mean, like congressional laws being changed.
Yes, absolutely.
I like fist pump and like, yes, this is so awesome. And then I walk into a new space and it's okay, put on your rucksack. Let's go. My mental rucksack, right? And I see this in certain areas. I see this in the acquisition community, in the innovative space. I see it in the cyberspace, but I see all the greatness in the fact that guess what? We can join this space. And so, the hat tip goes to the people that are starting again in those communities. But when we look at the grittiness of this, it takes us all to like grab hands and say, okay, let's go into this space. And oh, by the way, you have to know your value. If you have made phenomenal change agent like shifts, which you've done, and it's great to see NatSec Girl Squad continue to go and grow. And oh, by the way, Maggie started at the beginning with our entry level discussion. And I'm going to amplify this to those of us who have been in the space and profited off of this space. You need to do a little more than the $20 membership, men and women, please. We need to invest in this organization so that it is around for other people, because you go and you grow by also having higher level investors. And that's something that I want to kind of push forward. So as we start to conclude this phenomenal discussion, we need to kind of celebrate some of those women who made it happen. The women and men that really kind of dug deep and invested in yourself and your organization. Who are some of those people?
I mean, I for sure would say you, right? I mean, I remember I was at a conference in Nevada somewhere. I don't even, like, why was I there? It's not clear. And I got an email from you, right? We were planning, I guess, was it the 2018 or 2019 conference. You were like, hey, I found your organization. Like, what can I do? And I was like, oh, hello. Let me give you this list of things that you can be a part of. And you just took it and ran with it, right? And I remember you did that first session and people just went wild, right? Like hundreds of people were just eating it up, which does not surprise me. So certainly you. I would also say Sasha O'Connell, who, poor Sasha, just thought that she was being, set up on like a little blind friend date, so to speak, with me, after leaving, many years at the FBI as a senior executive and entering, quote, the civilian world. Someone was like, oh, you should meet this girl, Maggie, you'll have at least have something to talk about. I do not think that she anticipated being roped in, would be an understatement, to this adventure. And, there are a number of men who are so crucial to NatSec Girl Squad, to our community, people like John Saad at Guidehouse. Guidehouse was the first kind of really large company to say, we see value in what you're doing, and we see value in what you're doing from a for-profit perspective, and we want to partner with you, right? And like, we want to bring what you're doing to our clients. We want to bring what you're doing to our employees, and we want to, help you start to think about like, what does, 2.0, 3.0 look like? And it is so important to have people of all kinds step up like that, right? And part of what I really value in the, what very much started as a kind of like client relationship with Guidehouse, and now absolutely considered John like a friend and a mentor and a sponsor. It was not just out of the goodness of his heart, right? From a business perspective, he was like, this is a solid investment of our resources.
Right.
Something, right, that Guidehouse was like, you know what, this is a differentiator for us. This is a way that we can not just show value, but create value for our organization and for the federal government. And we want to invest in this.
It's smart. I mean, it's smart money. It's good business.
Right.
And you shouldn't have to be afraid to say that. I would say another person that I have seen, I'm an active participant that I give a hat tip to, is author Dan Ward. I mean, he's done a tremendous amount. And not only that, just knowing his background, we've kind of had this, commingled career. And I even, saw his book at a library at the CIA, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell him this. How cool is that? Like, your full writing is in there. How cool.
That's so cool.
And it's super cool. And the fact that he continues to do it, it's not a one and done. And that harkens back to the very beginning of this conversation. Be an active participant in wherever you find yourself. And if you're working to make the world a better place, keep it up. Keep going. Maggie, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining and allowing my listeners to kind of peek behind the curtain of NatSec Girl Squad and how we're going to continue to just, keep rocking it, keep going.
I'm so grateful that you started this podcast and that you have finally let me come be on it, because I'm like, everyone else gets to be on Candid Leadership, and I just... what else do I have to do to be one of your guests? It's such a coveted opportunity.
Honestly, I had to wait until like a monumental number one. I had to get enough listeners. So thank you, listeners, for having me in your ears. Number two, it had to be a season opener or season concluder. So this is the conclusion of a fantastic season 2. And so that's why.
And I'm looking forward to celebrating the end of season 2 in person.
There you go. All of us.
Yay.
Yay. Thank you for the people that vaccinated us.
Hey, yay for wads of science injected directly into your body.
That's right. We are there. So thank you to the listeners out there. Don't worry, there will be a season 3. All right. Thanks, Maggie.
Yep.
That was Maggie Feldman-Piltch, leader and all-around change maker at NatSec Girl Squad. I really appreciate you listening to this conversation. And if you want more candid perspectives on leadership, go to colonelcandid.com. I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter, where you'll receive the latest Candid Leadership episodes and notifications about writings and links to other great leadership and mentorship content. I would also encourage you to share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and whoever you think could benefit from the information and wisdom shared by my amazing guests. I know I grow with every conversation, and I want to share that experience with as many leaders as we can. This show grows by word of mouth, so be sure to share this podcast, and please, if you think I've earned it, leave me a 5-star review on wherever you find yourself listening to this podcast. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Colonel Candace Frost.